Hi, I'm Sherry DeGrippo, and this is a talk about the evolving threat landscape. Thanks for joining me. Disclosure. I'm sorry that we're all virtual, but hopefully we can get through some interesting information and learn a little bit, even though we're not all together. So I want to talk about threat actor decision making, the data that they're using, how they're making their choices, what are they understanding, what are they kind of thinking about. A lot of people in threat intelligence spend their day figuring out what these threat actors are doing in their jobs. So we're basically watching and tracking the workflow of somebody else. So how are we doing that, and what are we learning from the information that we're gathering? So first, I am Sherry DeGrippo. I'm the Senior Director of Threat Research and Detection at Proofpoint. I lead the threat research teams who are responsible for detection in the secure email product TAP, the TAP intelligence campaigns, as well as the emerging threats product and capability. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I am right now. My Twitter is at Sherrod_IM. Feel free to follow me. And if you have questions at the end, would love to get any questions that you think of later via Twitter, DM, or public is fine. Feel free to contact me there. I have a huge screenshot collection. It's one of my proudest possessions. So we'll go through some of the screenshots that I've collected over the years and sort of see what's happening out there. I've been in InfoSec for 16 years, primarily at information security vendors, and one little stint at federal government. So what are these threat actors doing? I don't know. There's really no right answer unless we actually infiltrate their day-to-day work. But a lot of what we do in our work is understand what they're doing, what are they focusing on, what matters to them, how are they making their decisions, and definitely how are they choosing the targets that they send their attacks to. So let's take a quick look at the overall landscape and understand what we're dealing with. First, whenever we talk landscape, whenever you talk to somebody about threat landscape, understanding the data that that person is using to base their assertions and conclusions and summaries on is really, really important. So the primary vector that I'm using is email and network data, primarily email. So we're looking at about 5 billion emails a day. About 1 billion of those go through the TAP product. 80% of email that we see is actually spam. And the places that we're looking at email are corporate enterprise, government, NGOs, the things in the Fortune 1000, large enterprise, a little bit of small, medium business, but primarily enterprise email. And enterprise email is getting about 80% spam. So what do I mean when I say spam? Spam is not a threat. It's unsolicited commercial email that people get with sale coupons, adult dating, pharmacy stuff, all of those different things. Those are spam. We wouldn't really consider those threat. So if you're using email as an attack vector, what are you going to weaponize? There's only a couple of things that you can do with an email that you can use to send a payload through. URL in the body, an attachment attached to the email. You can do business email compromise or email fraud, which is purely social engineering, or you can do a combination of all of these for the best success. So let's look back at the malware that we've seen in email 2013 to 2018. A lot of what we look at is URL versus attachment. Those are the primary delivery vectors, especially when we talk about volume. As you can see in 2016 and 2017, tons and tons of volume. I think that the Locky actor, Dridex, those are responsible for those big spikes. They really came from those two places for the most part. URLs and attachments go back and forth between popularity, and right now, URLs are way more popular. The reason that URLs are so popular as a delivery mechanism is that they can change what's at the end of it. So if you want to use one payload one day, a different payload another day, and because of things like URL shorteners, cloud hosting providers, you can get lots and lots of different URLs and potentially do one-to-one. Send a customized URL to every single one of your targets and increase the possibility they'll click, as well as try to evade detection as best you can, because there are just so many URLs and visiting all of them and inspecting all of them takes a lot of work. Attachments, they're still happening, they're still popular, but it's hard to do something like Credfish with an attachment. With Credfish, you want someone to click on a URL, go to a landing page, all those kinds of things, which I think is really what's contributing to URLs being the dominant vector right now. Maybe attachments will bounce back and take over again. I've seen it go back and forth over the past 5 years or so, where one's in the running, falls off, and then a different one comes back. So let's talk about extension volumes. We can inspect 100 and something different file extensions, but the ones that we see the most, especially those that are weaponized, are your Word documents, Office Suite, anything, Excel macros, Office macros, and of course the tried and true PDF, where you can put a URL and a lot of formatting, graphics, etc. into a single file, and it'll get sent across pretty easily with a PDF. Now, PDFs are really popular. We see that here in terms of volume. But you also want to notice something else about this, and that's those drops that happen. There's 4 of them over this 30-day period. What do we typically have 4 of in a 30-day period? Weekends. So we see the threat actors typically sending on Monday through Friday when people are in the office, and you can see Wednesdays and Thursdays are pretty popular. Mondays is when it just starts kicking off. Fridays drop off a little bit. And those are the days that people typically tend to be in the office. The threat actors want their payloads in that inbox with as little time as possible between when it drops in the inbox and when their intended recipient opens up that email. There's lots of reasons for this. You can probably guess. The longer that email sits, the less likely it is to be successful because of mitigating controls that may be in place in that organization. Things like a secure email gateway, things like a web gateway that blocks traffic going out, things like patches being applied over a weekend. If an email drops into a box on Friday, there's a patch window over the weekend. By Monday, whatever they were leveraging with that email may not work anymore. Also, the capability of a lot of email providers and secure email gateways to actually rip emails out of the email box when they're found to be malicious after the fact. There's lots of reasons to minimize the time. And so that means that things like holidays, weekends, Monday and Friday, those are volumes that are lower because the threat actors are trying to be as successful as they can. So what are those malware that we see? We look at things essentially in 2 different buckets when it comes to actual technical payload. Credfish, which is click a link, go to a landing page, and then malware, which is attachments or URLs that you can click and pull the payload down from there. We see all of the tried and true greatest hits. Obviously, Emotet spent January to early February doing campaigns, dropped off until the first week of July when it came back. And Emotet is responsible for a lot of volume. We see a big spot there where Emotet has made a dent. We also see a lot of loaders, so GooLoader and ZLoader. These flexible downloaders, they're modular. They can allow a threat actor to do 2nd, 3rd, 4th, later stage payloads and make decisions about what payloads each machine gets after the downloader is successfully installed. So those downloaders are really popular. Ursnif and Dridex are massive volume all the time. I'd say that we see an Ursnif campaign probably 4 times a week, sometimes every single day. They're really popular, tried and true, been going for a long time. So in terms of message volume, what are the exploits that we're seeing? We kind of group them into a couple of different types, including the kits that are builders for the macros, whether they're using macros. A lot of times they'll combine all of these capabilities. So you'll do an XL4 macro that has some kind of VBS, and then it'll do PowerShell. It'll use these different techniques and kind of go through all of them. Maybe it was a macro that was built with LCG kit. Maybe it's leveraging a CVE. We don't tend to see a lot of vulnerabilities being leveraged within email for the plain reason that they're not that necessary. They work if you have a vulnerable system, but there's so many ways that you could send, for example, a malicious macro through a Word document. It's just a lot easier to do that. So in terms of threats from URL, Credfish, huge. You send the link to the Credfish page, you have the user put in their credentials, you collect those, maybe you pass them on to the actual site where they can log in. But pulling down credfish credentials is really popular URL threat. We're also seeing these traffic distribution systems. SOC Golish uses them. Black TDS is one. And these are basically sending traffic around to different landing pages that then say things like, you're using an old version of Firefox, you need to update your Chrome, things like that, that convince the user that they need to download and install some kind of update, but in fact, they're downloading and installing some kind of potentially exploit kit or some kind of malware payload, usually a remote access Trojan or a keylogger or something like that. So SOC Golish, they're pretty popular. They do a lot of these fake browser updates, and they do them for every browser. So whether it's Firefox, Chrome, Edge, any browser you can really think of, they'll let you go to a landing page that convinces you that you need to download a JavaScript file that is an update to your browser. We also see this interesting tactic. There have been so many new TLDs released. A lot of you are probably really familiar with .xyz. There's only one good domain on .xyz. I won't mention what it is. You can try to figure that out. The rest of them tend to be malicious of some kind. This is a great example of a TLD that looks like a sentence or looks like a brand name, which was probably the original intent of making this a TLD, but networking.work, Cisco, it's perfect. It goes together. And you see that they've worked it into this sentence, making it look like a brand name. Networking.work, IT operations and the workforce in the age of automation and AI. Wow, incredible. So the other thing they can leverage too is that this might be out there other places where people will click on it, even if it was legitimate. This is a really good example of there's hundreds and hundreds of TLDs that are being leveraged for lots of malicious purposes. Networking.work is just one of them. So we also see a ton of malicious payloads hosted on cloud-based file stores. Dropbox, Box, OneDrive, SharePoint, any of those places where a threat actor can either compromise an existing OneDrive or SharePoint account or register for free storage like with Dropbox or some of those other file sharing applications, cloud file shares. These are really popular for hosting payloads. And if you look at that URL, they're each unique for each person that you send them to. So the threat actors can create almost unlimited different kinds of URLs and send those out. Attachments. So we see lots of different tactics with attachments. Enable content, enable editing on those Word document macros is really, really popular still. PDFs that have a link inside them. What you can do with a PDF that's really cool is that you can create these really well done graphics and layout, making something look like a spoofed brand or a spoofed legal document. It could be really anything. XL4 macros, super popular. Lots of capabilities within that. We've seen lots of vulnerabilities be leveraged. Not as common, but CVE 2017-11882, that's one that we see all the time. 0199 is, I believe that's the equation editor vulnerability, which is an interesting one. We've seen a lot of these XL4 macros recently, and we've seen a ton of PDFs with links inside of them. So here's an example of one of the XL4 macros. Boer loader, which is one of those flexible modular downloaders, asking you to run the macro. And this campaign was about 600 messages, which is not really big across the entire landscape, about 90 customers. So not super targeted to specific individuals, not super targeted to a specific vertical, but it was a little bit weighted toward manufacturing and educational. It's an XL4 macro that says enable content, which people tend to click because it says that it's a security warning and that there's a bill. So they think, oh, this attachment is something that I need to view. Password protected documents are really, really common as well. The password, or in this case, they said passcode, probably to avoid detection, will come in the body of the email. And this is an attempt at evasion or not being detected by secure email gateways. these are ones that are easily ripped out of the body and applied to the payload. So it doesn't really work all the time, but there are certainly unprotected email boxes out there that these get through pretty easily because the password is in the body of the email. And then it kind of gives the user this idea that, oh, this is safe. I can type this in and I'm protected. It's using a password, things like that. And we've seen passwords on both a zip file containing a Word document and, for example, the Word document itself using the Microsoft Office password protection feature. So here's a creative one where the threat actor is putting the password in the body of the email, but you can't see it in the slide and you can't see it when you view the email. But that 1115 is actually a picture. It's a graphic. So they've made an HTML email that looks like a text email, but they've embedded this image of the password in the email HTML. So that's pretty smart. It causes the target to have to type it in. If they try to copy paste it, it won't work. It's super short. And so we've seen this as a way to get around that. It's not very effective, but it is an attempt by the threat actors to get around that. So let's look at a couple of examples. Travel and hotel has been really popular in terms of receiving, especially COVID-19 related threats because of all of the changes across travel bookings and people being charged for things or people having to pay fees or trying to get out of reservations that they had planned. Another thing that's really popular for threat actors with travel is that they have these reservation addresses and these customer service addresses that are staffed by essentially a call center. It's a group of people who act essentially as a call center, but instead of taking phone calls from a hotline, they're receiving email into these kinds of email addresses, such as CC reservations, reservations at, hotel at, reserve a suite at. And in this particular campaign, this was malware called Revenge Rat, so it's a remote access Trojan, your classic malicious macro document, but it appears to have a receipt or a hotel folio, sort of when you check out of hotel. And the email lure essentially saying, I have a problem with my bill. Please view my attached receipt. I need to make changes. And you can't view this. It is blurry. It's impossible to read. And that really causes the target to want to click on those enable macros because they think, oh, I'll just click enable macros. I'll be able to see it. It'll be fine, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, it is malware, but these people are doing their job. And if it gets into their email box, that's their responsibility to look at them. So you're dealing with that thing where you have a sense of urgency from the recipient to do what they believe is right and to take care of their customer, but in fact, they're infecting themselves with malware. Another one targeting hotel groups. So this was targeting individuals that work at hotels, and it was leveraging Emirates Airlines branding. And these were, I wouldn't call this necessarily targeted, but it was a relatively specific recipient list, only hotel groups, and all of the people that received this had some sort of location in the Middle East. The ones that I looked at specifically were all in Cairo. I reviewed quite a few of them. I kept getting Cairo over and over and over again whenever I looked anybody up. So these were sent to the Middle East. They're talking about Emirates Airlines, and it's claiming to be a coronavirus ticket change. So, you had a ticket booked, you need to change this. And the titles that received these at work were service agent, director of sales, accountant, senior accountant, and they were all working at hotels. So highly likely that they did travel pretty frequently and would need to know if there was some kind of change to their reservations. As you can see, it's an attachment, and it basically is just telling you if you want a refund or if you want to make a change, you need to open up that attachment and take care of whatever travel arrangements you need to take care of. This included payloads such as Remcos, Ave Maria, and LimeRat, which we see frequently. If you can get one payload on, why not try to get the next one on too? And it's also talking about China operations, which especially at at the end of winter and the beginning of spring of this year, that was a really relevant thing that was on people's minds. Remco's rat. So we mentioned in that last threat that it resulted in a later stage payload of Remco's rat. So we see a lot of our threat actors doing this testing, and this particular actor did a really, really specific testing campaign where they sent out 2 different lures, and this is one of them. This was a mix of these 2 lures, and this was the first one, which is a classic DHL, your package is late, or this is your shipping notification, or your tracking number is enclosed. This one is leveraging coronavirus, okay, getting current events. And it's saying, due to coronavirus, you have to come pick up the package at the warehouse. If you don't pick it up in 7 days, we're going to send it back. Now, how do I find the warehouse? How do I get the label number? What are the services? All of these things, you have to read the enclosed file. And the attachment installs Remco's rat on the machine. But it's pretty close to what a DHL notification might look like. It says, copyright DHL at the bottom. It's talking about your package. Nothing really that suspicious or out of the ordinary. So this was the one of the 2 types of lures that was sent out in a single campaign over a single day, about half and half. So this is the first one, and this is the second one. Subject, sexual harassment report. A customer was assaulted by one of your staff. I received the video attached. In the email from an unknown source, the culprit has not been identified. Our work is not done. Harassment prevention is everyone's responsibility. Tremendous strides in our prevention measures and response to sexual assault. So we went from harassment to assault, and it's really emotionally charged. It's talking about a sexual assault at your work, right? So these are all sent to large enterprise email addresses. And it's claiming that the attachment, which is actually a remote access Trojan, is a video of sexual assault by one of your potential coworkers. So you can see the social engineering lures are really, really different. Hey, you got to come pick up this package. There's been a sexual assault. Here's a video. Very, very different emotional responses, very, very different calls to action. And this threat actor thought, I'm going to split these up. I'm going to do 2 in one campaign. And that's most likely to see which is more successful, and they'll take their cues from the metrics and the telemetry they get back, and they'll probably change the lures that they use later. So ransomware. We don't see a lot of ransomware as a first stage payload. It makes sense. As we've watched ransomware evolve over the past couple of years, it went from those locky million message blowouts in 2017 and 2018 to this more refined and specific capability where they're doing downloaders and then they send a ransomware after they decide what they want to do with their hostage at that point. So NEMT actually is a first stage payload that we see. And in this particular campaign, the subject of the email was March General Meeting Coronavirus. That's something that's been really popular and common across the pandemic social engineering capabilities. Some of the threat actors will go all out. They'll create a branded World Health Organization, important virus vaccine attached, all of these like really elaborate, well-branded, well-conceived type campaigns. Whereas a campaign like this, somebody just put coronavirus at the end of it. They didn't think about it. They just throw coronavirus in there. I was going to send an invoice, saying you got to pay your invoice. Now it's a corona invoice. We've seen that as well. So there's a variety of different ways to kind of either work coronavirus into the campaign or make the campaign all about coronavirus. In this particular case, it was a bit.ly URL going to a password-protected zip file. Of course, passwords make things secure. And inside is NEMT ransomware, of course. This is a small campaign, only 12 messages, primarily manufacturing and energy. And when you get your ransom note on your machine and it tells you what to do, you go to the landing page and it says, happy to see you. And it's got this sort of beautiful pink and yellow gradient pastel background. Don't worry, you can get all your files back, upload your nempty.txt, and then what's happening? Oh no, your files are encrypted. You get one test decrypt to prove that they can recover your files. So you have the ability to upload an encrypted file just to prove that it will work. It's $1,000 unless you wait until the time elapses, which I think was 5 days originally. And then it will jump to $2,000 worth of Bitcoin, of course. In this particular case, I've looked at a lot of ransomware. And $1,000 is a lot. $2,000 is really a lot. This is a very expensive ransomware in terms of kind of the widespread commodity ransomware. $1,000 is a lot. So you can buy your Bitcoin, you can decrypt it, and for whatever reason, Rick and Morty are the mascots in this particular page working on these. So let's take a look at one more ransomware, which is Avedon. There's a lot of things to point out about this ransomware. First, they use a different subject line for every email. Even with 3,000 messages, there were hundreds and hundreds of different subject lines. Do you like your photo? Do you know him? Is this you? And kind of variations on these really simple question type subjects. This typically comes via downloader, although we have seen it as a first stage payload as well. This particular campaign hit about 88% of its targets as transportation. So think shipping, airlines, logistics companies, all of those kinds of companies that fall into the transportation vertical. And it was about 1 million messages. So this particular campaign was not 1 million messages, but campaigns from Avedon can be about 1 million messages. Something to think about with Avedon, they have this logo, which you see on the top right. It's got a sort of 80s heavy metal look, and it has a hat in the second A as the logo. So this particular ransomware is $800, and I still don't think that's a bargain, but it's about $800 in this particular case. It has a QR code, really easy to just get all of this taken care of and get it paid quick. And when you go to the landing page on Tor, you see that for whatever reason, Hagrid, Dumbledore, and Sirius Black are characters being used by the ransomware. Not sure what that means. I'm guessing that Avedon is some sort of Harry Potter reference. And then the hat is sort of a wizard hat. So it's themed a little bit. Nempty is not really Rick and Morty themed, but they do use Rick and Morty on some of the landing pages. So let's talk about Nanocore Rat, which is a remote access Trojan. This was leveraging a couple of different things. It was first starting with COVID-19 coming from a local Centers for Disease Control to local to the targets that it was sending to. It had an attached ISO file called cdc.pdf.iso, which is an attempt to sort of trick people into thinking it's a PDF. And it's saying basically, because of the coronavirus, here are some directions for interacting with the Taiwanese Centers for Disease Control. Okay. So they also sent these to a variety of other locations with multiple different languages. Italy, United Arab Emirates, and Dubai, or Dubai and the United Arab Emirates, Uruguay. They all kind of have different elements of each other within this. But there's this idea that in Italy, because of COVID-19, you need to bring some documents because of an investigation. For the Dubai one, it's in English, and it's saying that there's an ongoing investigation. Please come to the, or read the documents and then contact your lawyer. And then Uruguay is one that is talking about reviewing attached documents. In Italy and in Uruguay, they have the social media icons, supposedly of the police department. But what's interesting as well are these thumbnails that look like a ticket or a court summons, or They've got stamps on them. They look like a thumbnail of some kind of official document, which again, when something's hard to see, that makes it pretty likely that someone's going to click on it to make it bigger or to install it to see if they can see it better. And you'll see also they've put the address of these police stations on UAE and Italy, and then they've used the same signature for Uruguay and UAE, which doesn't actually match to the typewritten name, and in Italy it's a different one, but it also does not match. So these look really official, but if you examine them closely, you can kind of see they're really not. They're in the language local of that geography. We saw many, many different countries and many, many different languages. The UAE one is in English. Italy is in Italian. Uruguay is in Spanish. So these are pretty interesting. They put some design capability into these, but they didn't really dial it down so that they're absolutely imperceptible. There's some weird things, especially when you look at them across a single campaign and you look at all of them, but maybe this would get somebody to click on it. So finally, I want to talk about an attack that we saw maybe 2 years ago now that leverages chickens. So the first thing I think about is, where do these threat actors work? A lot of them are in offices. They work together physically a lot of times. They're in Eastern Europe, Russia, former Soviet countries a lot of times, especially when you talk about crimeware for commodity malware. And so I sort of imagine they work in these, sort of dingy Cold War looking offices. Maybe they don't have nice computers. They can't all be on a yacht in the Black Sea. Or the ones that actually get to the yacht point are the big bosses up above. And these are just sort of the coders working. Maybe they have a sad plant or two. And the reason that I thought that is because this indictment that came out for Fin7 at the end of last year talks about how even the Fin7 gang guys have to use Jira to do issue tracking for software development, and that they were creating projects within Jira and associating those with issues for the various campaigns and targets that they were going after. So it just kind of made me think, that's what that workflow looks like. When you're Fin7, you're in Jira, closing Jira tickets, looking at issues. I don't know if they use a sprint system, if they're agile, I don't know. So we saw an attack that was going after fast food restaurants, the kinds that have a value meal, your basic, off the highway fast food places, burgers, fries, Cokes. So they're hitting these fast food restaurants, and we sort of started looking into the actual targets. Why are they hitting them? What is it about these fast food restaurants that's interesting? And one of the things that's really interesting about fast food restaurants is that they do a lot of credit card transactions, high volume, all day long credit card transactions. A lot of them also have broken credit card readers. If you've ever been to the Atlanta airport, I don't think I've ever used a chip at the Atlanta airport. They are always, always broken. And so we're sort of starting to see a correlation, thinking, okay, are they trying to get into these credit card transactions from the swiped cards because they're less secure and they can be collected more easily and potentially sold? So they started hitting a particular fast food restaurant, one that sold hot dogs. And one of the threat researchers on my team was really focused on this restaurant, learned all about their Monday through Friday meal deals. Wednesdays were 99-cent hot dog day. The highest volume of attacks were always on Wednesday toward this particular target. And the researcher on my team learned all about this fast food restaurant. Are they corporate owned? Are they franchises? Where do the franchisees live? How often do the franchisees go to the stores? How many stores does this franchisee own? And really was looking into the communications of this particular target, trying to understand what the threat actors were doing, why they were going after these particular fast food restaurants, why there's, such a higher volume of attacks on 99-cent hot dog day, all of these different things. So then the threat actors started pivoting. And if you remember, a year and a half or 2 years ago, there was a big national phenomenon in America about chicken sandwiches. People were getting into fights There were lines. They were running out of chicken sandwiches. It was pretty dramatic. And we saw that this threat actor stopped with the burgers and value meal fast food, stopped with the hot dog place, and started focusing on restaurants that specialize in chicken. Now you might think, oh, I can't think of one. There are actually a lot of fast food restaurants that specialize in chicken. I live in Atlanta. We have 2 here that are headquartered here that are all about chicken. So think for a minute about fast food drive-through places that have chicken. There's more than you can imagine. But this threat actor started hitting a handful of those chicken-focused fast food restaurants. Okay, so we're watching this go on. And then they started hitting chickens. Not actual chickens, they don't have email addresses. They started hitting poultry farms. It was 3 poultry farms, 2 in the southeast and 1 in the northeast. I found out, as I said, I live in Atlanta. I grew up here. About an hour away is a place called Gainesville, Georgia. Gainesville, Georgia is the poultry capital of the world, and they have a lot of poultry farms there. So this threat actor was hitting 2 poultry farms in the southeast and 1 in the northeast. And we started watching this thinking, okay, you're hitting the sandwiches, but now you're hitting the chicken? And then we saw that attack start filtering down, and that actor started going after 2 VARs. So a VAR is a value-added reseller. You probably have some kind of relationship with a VAR, whether you know it or not. They sell hardware, they sell software, and a lot of times they sell services and support to go with that hardware and software. So you would buy a 1U machine, you would buy the operating system licensing, some software licensing, you buy rack and stack services, maybe some config services, and you would buy something like support, which means that when you have a problem, they're the help desk that you call. 2 of these VARs are pretty well known for their remote desktop software. That they bundle that with their software licenses when you buy support services. You also get their remote desktop application pre-installed on any of the hardware that you buy along with it. So this threat actor was doing something pretty smart. They started looking at regular fast food restaurants. They started looking at specialty fast food restaurants. And then they started looking at the supplier to the specialty fast food restaurant, finally looking at the VAR and the IT and technology services providers to those poultry farms. And we had to go through and understand all of the relationships, all of the business capabilities, the processes, the people, to be able to put all of this together and understand exactly what that threat actor was doing and what they were thinking. But if we have the ability to do it, that means the threat actor has the ability to do it too. They're able to look through, understand the relationships, the people, the access capabilities, what that company does, what their main business is, how they do that business. Because you can find out all of that information pretty easily, especially if you've been able to breach one of these organizations earlier in the chain and then start looking through their email, their invoicing system, all of the different systems that they have, anything interconnected for vendors, for payroll. And it's highly likely that this threat actor thought, hey, if I can compromise a big part of this chain, I can essentially get the payday from purchases of merchandise, purchases of services, and then with the VAR, potentially they could be in all of those data centers that VAR sold hardware and services to. So finally, I want to talk about a threat to most of you, which is a threat to information security professionals and software developers. This came out sometime earlier this year, talking about this is your OSINT dashboard for week 27. It was sent only to people with titles that relate to information security and people that have titles that relate to software development, software engineering. And essentially it's saying you can access the SharePoint EBF document from the European Banking Federation for the OSINT dashboard. It's a PDF. It signs off and says European Banking Federation, with kind regards, and gives the address and the ID number. And it says, please consider the environment before printing this malware. This is a great example that the threat actors are doing their homework, figuring out who they can send to. buying and compromising lists of people with common interests and common backgrounds, knowing that software engineers and information security professionals have elevated access. The cloud services that a threat actor can compromise by having a successful credfish is possibly an O365 account. You're using O365 at work, almost guaranteed if you're not on Google. If you compromise an O365 account, you have essentially stolen the identity of that person. You've stolen their corporate identity. You can not only see the information that they have available to them, but you can become that person. You can send information. You can create information. You can act as them in chat, in email. You can upload files as if you are that person. So if you compromise the corporate identity of someone in an InfoSec role or someone in a software engineering role, you not only have access to all the code, all the files, all of those things that are shared within that company, but you have access to now become that person's identity. It's corporate identity theft, and it's really scary. But essentially, they're targeting people that have those roles, and it's pretty smart. They're thinking about it. So I really appreciate everyone watching and joining, even though we're virtual. I hope that I will be able to see everyone next time. If you have any questions or you think of something later, feel free to shout at me on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle, and have a great rest of the con.